When Elder Scrolls Online launched in 2012, it was a bit of a disaster. Despite having the facade of an Elder Scrolls game, it was basically just another MMORPG, and that upset a lot of people. The MMO boom had just come to a crashing halt, and people were really hoping for something different. Nonetheless, the game did have a pretty successful console launch, and while that did invigorate the player base, ultimately it was a sinking ship. It was very clear to the developers that they needed to make some major changes if this was going to survive. And in 2017, that is exactly what they did. An update that ultimately saved them from the MMO curse. You see, in order for an MMO to survive, it needs to constantly come out with expansions. However, with most MMOs, it's impossible to have these expansions satisfy both new players and veterans of the game. The choice is either it's late game content that veteran players can now experience, but new players will have to grind through hours of boring other stuff before they can get there, or it's a new player expansion, which will ultimately feel boring and pointless to players who already far surpass those levels. And since it's a far safer bet to cater to your currently paying player base rather than neglect them and try and bring in some new people, ultimately devs usually choose to focus on the veterans, which unfortunately leaves you in a situation of diminishing returns. Every time you launch a new expansion, you're only going to be able to get so many people back to play your game. So how did Elder Scrolls Online avoid this? Well, that was all thanks to the one Tamriel update, a change that brought the game more in line with the Elder Scrolls franchise that people were familiar with, allowing people to go anywhere and do anything without having to worry about their level or restrictions. But far more importantly, it also gave ZeniMax Online an opportunity to change the way they approach expansions. Instead of either having to neglect veteran players or new players, they could now try and strike a balance between the two. Even if you had done all the quests, you didn't feel like your time was wasted. But new players were also not expected to understand thousands of hours of content and story in order to be able to do this new one. Now, before you start typing your angry comment about how actually you didn't like this one, the reality is you just can't please everybody. There's always going to be somebody who's mad about something, but if you try to worry about the feelings of every single person, ultimately, you're probably just going to end up making the worst decision overall. Ultimately, thanks to this change, Elder Scrolls Online has been able to grow back a very vibrant player base. And if other legacy MMOs, SWTOR, I'm looking at you, want to continue to survive, they're going to have to take a look at what ESO has done, especially since the success of this change, both player-wise and financially, proves that an MMO doesn't need to be a boring grind fest in order to maintain subscription numbers. Now sure, Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft both have far more active players, but considering the fact that ESO is only available in North America and Europe, and those other games, including SWTOR, which has a smaller player base, is available all throughout the world, it's honestly pretty impressive that ESO is able to contend at all. I hope you learned a little bit more about Elder Scrolls Online and the problems that comes with traditional MMORPGs. If you're interested in more, I did a video on SWTOR and why that game had problems. I guess I don't remember what that video was about. Alright, I'll see you there. Goodbye.